what is it about Judaism that makes Jews successful? They never want to talk about that. If you don't want to take responsibility for your own actions, you look around and you say, who did me bad? Who did me down? Why am I not more successful? And the answer is pretty nearly always yourself.
Welcome back to Nick Talks, and welcome to my second guest of my first ever radio show. Brian of London, thank you for coming along today.
You're welcome. It's a great pleasure to join you on the first show.
Thank you so much. You call yourself a Jewish rights activist, and we're going to get into the terminology of anti-Semitism and things like that in a minute. But my first question is, because you are Jewish and you're an Israeli citizen, let's start at the beginning. Why do you think Jews are hated and are constantly hated? There is an American academic called Thomas Sowell who was asked this question a decade ago or something, and he said, "Oh, the answer's simple." And he was asked why are Jews hated, and he simply said it's because they're successful. What's your answer?
That's actually part of my answer too. I think it's jealousy. If I have to put one word on it, it's jealousy. And then it's a projection of inferiority. So people feel, exactly as Sowell said, Jews are successful. What does that breed? Well, people, and this is so bad in the sort of era we live in with the Instagram feeds and the influencers and so on. People, what is going on in the world? What don't I have? And they look around, they see some successful Jews, and so part of it is jealousy. It's like, I want why have they got that? They must be doing something nefarious in the background to get that stuff and to be successful. What's making them successful? And the only thing that I find that people don't ever do is they don't actually go and look, what is it about Judaism that makes Jews successful? They never want to talk about that. They want to come up and invent nonsense that isn't really what Jews are about. And I mean, it's here for you to see if you want to look, but people don't do that. They just say, we're going to hate the Jews. And there's specific brands of Jew hatred, but my favorite sort of, if I have to go to one thing, it's jealousy.
I'm writing a book at the moment about Anglophobia, and one of the chapters in that book is about jealousy and envy of the English. Now, the English haven't suffered like the Jews have suffered. I'm not trying to make that comparison at all, but it's the same mindset. It's look at the English, look at the Jews, look what they've achieved for tiny race compared to the rest of the globe. Their successful has to be down to cheating, because if they didn't cheat, we could have been just as successful. So it can't be our fault that we didn't work hard enough, or we weren't clever enough, or we didn't focus enough. They must have cheated. It's a human trait of always wanting to blame someone else for your own failures. That's what I believe actually the core of Judaism is personal responsibility. Responsibility for your own actions. And if you don't want to take responsibility for your own actions, you look around and you say, who did me bad? Who did me down? Why am I not more successful? And the answer is pretty nearly always yourself. Now, doesn't mean everybody's going to be a billionaire, but you've got certain inalienable talents. And one of the sort of key marks of being successful is looking into yourself and being responsible for your own actions. And Judaism is all about personal responsibility. We don't believe in a kind of a, we don't believe in telling people what to do. We give people a choice and a path and say, this is a good path. But it's really it's far less prescriptive than most people understand. Or, there are rules about kosher. I may choose to follow them or not, but the rules are there, but it's a personal responsibility to take them.
So you don't like the term anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, those buzzwords that we seem to use all the time now. You don't like them. You don't think they hit the right tone or they don't relay the right message. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, this term, what is a Semite? I mean, firstly, I don't like that. Secondly, the term anti-Semitism actually came from a German, Wilhelm Marr, I believe, who became actually a mentor to Hitler, and it was a euphemism he developed. Personally, I stick with the term Jew hatred. It's like, do you hate Jews for some irrational reason or some jealousy or what doesn't matter the reason? What do you hate? Do you hate the specifics of how we pray? I don't know. None of that is encompassed by anti-Semitism. And I personally, I should sort of drop the whole term and just say Jew hate. It's sort of, I think that if one says that, it makes it more clear. It stops frivolous use of the term. So you don't go around accusing everybody of anti-Semitism. When you say Jew hatred, it focuses the mind, and the same thing happens. It packs more of a punch, which both means it has more meaning than what's said. It removes this silly thing about, are Arabs Semites? What's a Semite? I mean, nobody knows what a Semite is. It's a word that has lost all kind of reasonable meaning in the modern world. And so and the other thing is anti something. It's just, no, it's Jew hatred. And, I extend that as well. I don't like Islamophobia because, I don't have a phobia, an irrational fear of Islam. Twice last week, Muslims actually rang alarm bells and I had to go into this room, which is my bomb shelter, because Yemen was trying to shoot at me. I mean, the missile that hit the airport, that's 15 kilometers from here. That was aimed at me, my whole area. We got alarm bells. That's, if that's the actions of Muslims, and if that's the actions of Islam, and it's Muhammad telling them to do that, then yeah, I actually don't like Islam's teaching for that. It's not that I'm phobic of Islam. I have a rational fear. These terms have become silly.
They were powerful words. I call them the super words. You could shut someone up by calling them racist, by calling them an anti-Semite, by calling them, Islamophobic. These were powerful words that people used to shut other people up. And I know many Jews who still use the word anti-Semite to shut people up. And sometimes, they are anti-Semites because of what they're saying, but sometimes they're not anti-Semites. In the West, we've become quite cowardly and we don't challenge people's ideas anymore now because we can't. We're not educated enough and we're too silly and too stupid and too lazy. We rely on super words to close down speech we don't like.
Calls it gramophone mind and gramophone phrases. There's a fantastic essay by him, which is a bit sort of obtuse, but it's called Politics and the English Language, and it describes how these words are sort of denuded of all useful meaning, and that's what's happened to and the sort of woke left is the absolute. They are the epitome of doing this. They all terms of meaning. We're currently genociding Gaza. That word is an unbelievably powerful word. It should mean something massive. It's not going on in Gaza, and so therefore the misapplication of it is a crime in and of itself. I don't like false accusations of anti-Semitism or Jew hatred as much as, I think that they're really dangerous because we lose sight of what it is to irrationally hate a large group of people. To hold all Jews responsible for what Bernie Madoff did or any other famous bad Jew. That's I'm held responsible for his actions. How is that anything other than Jew hatred?
There's a reason why we have some of these words. There's a reason why we use some of these words to describe the most evil people in history. We used to call the most evil people Hitler. You're just like Hitler. Now I'm called Hitler. I was at a street rally. Yeah, exactly. I was at a street rally a couple of weeks ago about the grooming gangs in the UK. It's talking about how we need a national inquiry, about how we need to prosecute politicians who have covered it up. And behind me was 50, 100 people chanting at me, Nazis off our streets. And it's like, I've become a Nazi by not wanting children in my country being gang raped. And having some of those words was important. We need to differentiate between, proper evil people and, people we dislike. But we've just gone straight to the most offensive word we can shout at somebody. And it devalues that word. Let's get into my next question, which is up to a year and a half ago, I knew about Jew hatred. I would have said not really a problem in the UK. It may have been in the past, just like it has been in Europe, but we don't do that anymore now. We live in a supposedly multicultural society. We're a bit more tolerant now. There's some extremes. There'll be some Muslims who hate Jews. There'll be some far right nutcases who hate Jews. But on the whole, those days are over. Jews live their life and they've got nothing to worry about in the UK. Then October 7th happened 18 months ago. And I was completely shocked, and I'm still shocked now, about the amount of Jew hatred that appeared overnight. It must have been always there. It must have been, for some reason, we kept a lid on it. It must have been there bubbling away, because that doesn't happen overnight. And suddenly it explodes across my country, Western world. You expect it in the Middle East, you expect it in other countries. You don't expect it in my country. And completely shocked. Was you waiting for that? Did you know that was going to happen as a Jewish person raised in the UK? Did you know it was bubbling away all the time, or was you shocked?
Look, I left the UK 16 years ago, and I left because I had my first child was born in the UK, and my second child was born just after I got to Israel. I left because I had a feeling I knew what was going to happen. And unfortunately, it was mostly to do with mass Muslim immigration. And, I've been an immigrant twice in my life. I was born in South Africa, moved to the UK as a baby, and now I've been an immigrant in Israel. Mass immigration can be done. Israel's done it massively, on a much greater and grander scale than any other modern nation in history, really. But unassimilating immigration, and this is what I see with Islam, I just don't see Islam ever assimilating. Next to me, I've got the Quran. The Quran is full of Jew hatred. There's just no other way to say it. And this isn't sort of background Jew hatred, it's actual instructions which we can then look on October the 7th and see were carried out. Muhammad massacred Jews. He took pride in it. Khaybar, Ya Yahud. He personally beheaded Jews. And that's their goal. Now, as far as the UK and Jew hatred, look, when I lived there, at different levels of society, at most levels of society, British, they just didn't know what a Jew was, and there was no negative, no positive. But at the upper echelons, and I kind of wound up working some of the time within the civil service as a consultant, and at the upper levels, I didn't like what I saw. Anti-Israel feeling, which I believe was very much anti-Semitic, but it was kept the lid was kept on it by this. There's nothing else to say about it but the memory of the Holocaust, for right or for wrong. I don't think that should define who Jews are, and it doesn't define what Israel is today. But a lid was kept on it. But October the 7th has totally and utterly opened this absolute gaping sore, where you have this kind of left-wing hatred of Israel, because
Israel is the nation state of the Jews. And I think, if we're going to go, that song by John Lennon, which is the worst song ever written, Imagine. What that song is about is the destruction of all nation states into a Marxist, globalist, one nation type. Imagine there's no countries, imagine no heaven, no earth. That horror is countered by a Jewish state, and a Jewish state on the land where Judaism began and where Judaism invented the Bible and gave the Bible to the world, which is the foundation of your civilization. You've got a beautiful cross on the wall behind you. Everything Jesus did and said, it's very Jewish. There's just no other way to look at it. The philosophy of Christianity is very Jewish. Of course he was. But it's more than he was, it's obvious that he was. And it's obvious that Christianity is a descendant of Judaism in a way that when I've studied Islam to the degree I've studied it, Islam is a polar opposite. It's an inversion. And that's why, I don't like this term Abrahamic faiths either, because, it implies a kind of brotherhood that's just not there. Christianity for a long while was trying to replace Judaism. It's sort of largely set that aside, which is good. I'm happy to live with Christians. I enjoyed living in a Christian country and growing up and singing Onward Christian Soldiers at school every morning. I know all those hymns. That's part of my upbringing, and I've got no animosity toward it whatsoever. But now I'm in Israel and I can be Jewish without being very, very Jew. This was part of why I left the UK. And you bringing this back to anti-Semitism in the UK, it began to feel that the only way I could raise Jewish kids in the UK was to ghettoize myself, to go live in Golders Green or Finchley or one of the other places, send my kids only to a Jewish school and sort of wrap them in Judaism to a degree that I wasn't comfortable with in the UK. Whereas you move to Israel, I'm in a very secular neighborhood, but the timetable of life, the pace, the things we celebrate and do, it's Jewish. And I don't have to impose my Jewishness on other people. I don't care what you eat. I don't want to. I want us to have the arguments about being Jewish here in Israel, and it shouldn't affect other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's happened. That's what's not happened in my country, is because we've allowed mass immigration with no assimilation. I don't care what religion someone is. I don't care what sexuality that person is. All those things should be done in the privacy of your own home or your own temple. It's not the most important thing about an individual. I deal with people at face value. I presume everyone's a good person until they prove me wrong. And it shouldn't matter to a certain extent our heritage, our religion, our sexuality, any of those things. If you live and belong to a country, we need those overarching beliefs, those overarching belongingness, whatever that word means, to make sure that we're successful. And it sounds like you found that in Israel.
Have and it's not just, I look back with, I'm sorry about what's happening in the UK. I mean, that interview with Raj you just did, I've got sitting here on my desk Easy Meat. This is the only book that's ever been written solely on the gang thing. I helped Peter when he was writing that. I've been very aware of that, and it's a national scandal that it has barely been talked about.
It is.
And it just makes me so sad, because I want Britain to get back to being, great again, if I can.
Well, one day we will get back to being great again. I can promise you that. Brian, we're at the end of the show. Thank you so much for coming on and being my second guest.